Both really love the great courses by the teaching company, and especially their history courses. They always get fantastic lecturers. So check that out, the American Civil War by Professor Gallagher, the teaching company. All right, so that's end of the commercial there, or end of the plug. Now, before we talk about the effectiveness of the blockade, let's go to a famous battle, an epic battle, which I was going to work this in one way or the other, Scott, because I love this story. The Monitor and the Virginia, or some people may think of it as the Monitor and the Merrimack. But so we talked about how the Confederates had captured the USS Merrimack. The Union had tried to scuttle it, in other words, sink it and make it unusable, but they didn't succeed. The Confederacy was able to raise the Merrimack, and they fixed it up and they turned it into an ironclad, and they renamed it the Virginia. Um, an ironclad is nothing more than, at this point, is a wooden ship with iron plates installed on the outside. And you didn't have this before. This is this is not the first ironclad ever created. The British were experimenting with it, and I think other nations were as well. But this is the first ironclad in U.S. history. And the Virginia is, so you've got this monster ship, and when you fire cannonballs and other shells, other artillery at it, they just bounce off. The Virginia was sent to break up the Union blockade near Norfolk, Virginia. And on its first day, March 8th, 1862, it destroyed 2 Union vessels and damaged 3 others. So this thing is a beast, man. It's a monster and scares the crud out of the Union. It's just going around creating destruction everywhere it goes. But the next day, things are going to be a little bit different. So the next day is March 9th. The Virginia goes out to do more damage. They're going to finish up the other ships and maybe wipe out some more. But it runs into a new opponent, and this is the USS Monitor. And this is the Union's answer to the Virginia or the Merrimack. This is the first ironclad created in Northern history, not American history, because I guess technically the Confederacy is part of America, right? At least that's what Lincoln said. But the Monitor is a new kind of ship, whereas the Virginia was just a regular ship with iron plates stuck on it. The Monitor is a completely new design, and it's a very funny looking thing. Everybody looked at it and said, "That is weird," or "That is just ugly, but ugly." I mean, it was like a cheese. Somebody said it was like a cheese box no. How did they describe it? Well, anyway, I won't try to recall that off the top of my head, the quote, but it sat very, very low in the water, almost like a submarine, like a modern submarine, but much smaller, of course. Most of the ship was actually below the surface of the water. It was flat on the top, and it had a turret that stuck up above the level of water, and it was a rotating turret. So it only had 2 guns, and that was pretty radical because most ships would have a lot more than 2, but it only needed 2 because it could just rotate around.
You don't have to turn your whole ship around like before.
Right, yeah. Before, since the time of the Romans, the Greeks, even earlier perhaps, if you wanted to fire in a different direction, you had to move the whole ship, but not anymore. Now, with the Monitor, you just move the turret and fire wherever you want. The 2 ships fought. Basically, it was a tie or a draw. It was off of Hampton Roads. Neither one was a clear winner. But this was one of these turning points in history because now wooden ships are obsolete. That's just this. The future of naval combat has arrived. Ironclad vessels are going to take over and completely dominate naval combat up to the present. The London Times commented on this, and they wrote, "Before the duel off Hampton Roads, the Royal Navy had 149 first-class warships. After the battle, it has just 2." So it's like, well, great. Those 2 experimental ironclads, we better hurry up and finish them. The rest are useless now. So as the Union Army marched up the peninsula toward Richmond, remember this is McClellan's slow plodding campaign, the Virginia had to go upriver. That's the Confederate ironclad. They couldn't keep it down near where the Union troops were or it would be captured. So they go up the river. Eventually the water is too shallow and the ship had to be scuttled. So that's the end of the Confederate ironclad, at least the Virginia. The Union would go on to make several more boats, just like the Monitor. In fact, Monitor becomes the name of a class of ships, to where you can start saying we have a Monitor class ship, or just we have a Monitor. The Confederacy is going to make some more ironclads as well, but not nearly as many as the Union.
Hey everyone, want to take a short break in this episode on our narrative on the Civil War. I want to mention a way how you can help support this show. And you can do so by saving big with a great new product from a company called Candid. Candid basically takes all of the misery out of adult orthodontia. There's millions of people at any given time in the United States who have wire braces, and there are many, many millions more who should be wearing retainers and aren't and need a tooth straightening solution. Well, Candid is a company that makes it possible to get tooth straightening without ever having to visit an orthodontist, without ever having to leave your home, and to get it all done much more cheaply and in a fraction of the time of conventional orthodontia. The way it works is that Candid sends a modeling kit to your home so you can take impressions of your teeth. After you send back your impressions with some photos of your teeth, a network of orthodontists reviews your case and provides you with a 3D preview of what your treatment will look like. After you receive your 3D preview, it's up to you if you want to go forward or not with a tooth aligner treatment plan. And when you get your treatment plan, it results in straighter and brighter teeth in an average of 6 months and can cost thousands of dollars less than braces. And again, no office visits are needed. Everything is delivered to your home. You can take advantage of Candid's risk-free modeling kit guarantee. And when you use my dedicated link, candidcode.com/unplugged, you'll save 25% off your modeling kit. That's candidcode.com/unplugged to get 25% off the price of your modeling kit. candidcode.com/unplugged. And just as an aside, it should be understood that these are all steam vessels. I wouldn't want to imagine a sail-powered iron vessel, but we're well past the point of sail ships in conflict. This is take a drink, well past the Napoleonic Wars of, if you know the Russell Crowe movie Master and Commander with the large sail ships firing cannon against one another, get that out of your head because that's not what's happening here.
Right. Speaking of movies, ding.
Yeah, two right there in a row.
Yeah, they're going to be feeling good in a little bit here. There was a movie made. It was a made-for-TV. I don't know if it was TNT or which network, called Ironclads, about this battle, but I can't find a copy of it anywhere. It's out of print. You can't go on Amazon and buy the DVD. At least I don't think. Maybe you can, but maybe I need to check again.
Right. I mean, in film,
it's probably not a very good movie. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily, based on the ratings anyway.
It's tricky because what you imagine in your mind of naval combat, it's either wooden vessels, Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever, or then you jump up to the World War II, Tora. And so we're in a middle point here that isn't really depicted on film or television very much.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There needs to be a movie about this. It's an exciting time and a momentous time. I can't talk anymore all of a sudden, but it's a momentous time in naval history. Anyway, so if you're listening, if you're a movie producer, please make a movie about this.
We'll take executive producer credits along the way.
That's right. We'll be your consultants. Actually, you may want to get somebody that knows more about it than me. But so let's talk about some successes of the Union Army, Navy rather. We're talking about naval combat. So the Union Army and Navy, in a joint effort, captured New Orleans on April 25th, 1862. We talked about that long ago, but here I just want to stress the role that the Navy played. It was crucial. And then let's talk about Mobile. We talked about a few episodes ago about how Nathaniel Banks was supposed to go attack Mobile, and he didn't. But they decided to sick the Navy on him. And so Admiral David G. Farragut, who had been the naval commander at New Orleans, he's in command of the squadron that's going to take Mobile, or at least attack Mobile. This is a great story. I love this. So Admiral Farragut ordered that the forts guarding the harbor, Mobile Harbor, that they be bombarded. And the Union vessels went into the harbor in a single line. And the first Union ship hit a mine, or a torpedo as they would have called it, and was damaged heavily. Farragut pulled his ship, the flagship, into the lead position, which was not ironclad. And I'm not even sure if it was a steamship or not. I was definitely wooden, though. But anyway, so Farragut, he's watching this and he's seeing that there are mines in the harbor and they're causing damage to one or more of his ships. And some of his officers went up to him and he said, "Sir, there's torpedoes in the harbor." And he gave this famous quote, which I love so much, and everybody's heard this. He said, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." So that's where that phrase comes from, "damn the torpedoes." It came from the Civil War. And Admiral Farragut. Farragut had vertigo and he was struggling with standing up. So he had himself lashed to the mast.
Did he hear the siren song too and put wax in his ears?
I don't think so, but maybe it would have at least drowned out the sound of all the cannon. But anyway, so this eventually the Union ships prevail. They do capture the harbor. They don't capture the city, but they make the port unusable. And then finally, we've seen that these ports, they fall one by one. And finally, in January of 1865, Wilmington, North Carolina, which is the last major Confederate port, it falls. And that's it. No more open ports. Of course, by this time, the war's almost over. They didn't know that at the time, of course. But anyway, so it took some time, but over time, the Union Navy did prevail and did, with the help of the Army, gradually knock out all the Confederate ports.
So how well does the blockade's effectiveness work? You said in the beginning it is very porous and essentially a blockade in name only.
Yeah, I wasn't able to get the stat on the beginning. I've heard it. I couldn't seem to dig it up for whatever reason. Maybe somebody can do that. But I think at the beginning of the war, only 1 out of 8 or maybe 1 out of 10 Confederate blockade runners were captured. So very, very few. It may have even been a smaller ratio. I'm not sure. But regardless of what the exact ratio is, if you were a Confederate blockade runner, your odds were really good at the beginning of the war, and you might actually make some really good money. But by the end of the war, 1 in 2 Confederate ships were captured. So by then you had a 50-50 chance. And just that alone dissuaded quite a few people who might have been blockade runners earlier in the war. They might have just decided, nah, it's not worth it. Because if you get caught, you lose everything. In all, about 8,500 vessels got through the blockade. About 1,500 were captured. So that's about a 15% capture rate overall for the entire war. So again, pretty good odds for the blockade runners, but bummer if you get caught. The Confederacy managed to import 600,000 rifles, 600,000 pairs of shoes, millions of pounds of lead, food, and other supplies. So that's pretty good haul, don't you think?
Yeah, it's interesting that the Confederate economy was basically a gigantic black market, a legitimized black market that still managed to fund a war effort for several years, which is incredible if you think about it.
Yeah, it is amazing that they were able to keep it going for 4 years. And, Confederate blockade runners that did get through, they were fast, as I mentioned, but they were small. They couldn't carry a lot of cargo. So you had to have a lot of ships going in and out to bring all this stuff over. The question, some scholars have argued, well, the blockade was not effective because obviously look at that 600,000 rifles, all the food, millions of pounds of supplies. But on the other hand, think of what would have gone through if they had not had the blockade. Let me go back and restate the number. In the 4 years of the Civil War, about 8,500 vessels got through. But in the 4 years prior to the war, there were 20,000 ships that went in and out of southern ports. So you could argue that it cut it in more than half. So I guess it depends on the way you look at it, with half full, half empty. But Dr. Gallagher, the professor that I mentioned earlier that did the Civil War lecture series for the teaching company, he estimates that the blockade cut Southern commerce to about 1/3 of its pre-war level. So if you measure it that way, then it was definitely successful, especially in the last couple of years.
Well, another big aspect too, we talk about coasts and we think of naval warfare as being purely oceanic, but one of the reasons that America as a nation is able to develop so quickly in its history is because we have such an extensive river network. And unlike other places in the world, unlike maybe Africa, for example, that has lots of waterfalls, we don't have that. So you can travel very far on a river that just makes it easier to develop America economically than other geographic places. So Rivers are a big deal in America, and that figures into naval combat too. So, what's going on with the River War?